Welcome to the Opportunity Podcast, where entrepreneurs come to learn from real buyers, sellers, and industry experts on the lesser-known growth opportunities to build their online business empires. We'll uncover tactics veteran online business entrepreneurs have used to build, buy, flip, and sell their way towards personal wealth. Sit back, grab a coffee, and get ready to uncover hidden growth secrets. The Opportunity Podcast starts now.
Welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast, your go-to resource for hidden growth opportunities throughout online business. We're your host. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brandon, and thank you for joining us on our latest episode. Today, we will be speaking with Mark Silberman, who has acquired several businesses from our marketplace since 2015 in the content and FBA space. Mark is managing partner of NetPix and also owns a large portfolio of digital assets across multiple monetizations. Mark first got his intro into the online world business space decades ago. Within the past 10 years, started actively acquiring now different monetizations from FBA, e-commerce, and even content-based businesses. Mark's an expert at taking a newly acquired email list and turning it into a growth driver for the business. And he also dives deep into the power of the list when describing his mindset for email marketing.
That's right. So Mark also uncovers some hidden opportunities that many digital property owners tend to overlook when optimizing their email marketing campaigns. And he also gives us some insider secrets on how you can prepare your content site for future Google algorithm updates and some low-hanging fruit that new business owners can take advantage of within a short amount of time. But we won't give away too much just yet, so let's dig into the interview and see what Mark has to share. And then at the end of the episode, we'll go over some of the best listings on the Empire Flippers marketplace that highlight the growth opportunities we've learned about today. So let's get started. Thanks everyone for tuning back into the Opportunity Podcast. Today we have Mark Silberman on, and we are so excited to have him on. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sarah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks. Definitely looking forward to talking about some of the acquisitions you've done with us. First, to kick things off, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and just kind of where you are in the world right now?
Sure. Well, I'm in Austin, Texas, and I started online business a long time ago, way back in 1996. So been doing online internet-based businesses during that time. Got into the acquisition side of things probably about 10 years ago or so. And really that was for a variety of reasons we'll probably get into. There are different reasons to acquire existing businesses, and I've had different motivations for probably each one that I've done, in some cases to supplement current assets that I have, in other cases to discover some new business models. But yeah, that's what I've been doing over this time. I've been doing it online and full-time for about 24 years.
Okay. Wow. I was wondering, you said you've been doing acquisitions for about 10 years. At what point did you kind of find out about this idea of buying and selling websites, and how did you eventually make your way working with Empire Flippers?
Sure, yeah. Initially, with my existing business, NetPix, which is financial investing publisher, we were always looking for potentially like additional products that we could bring on that are already developed, sometimes looking for an additional asset like a different website, which has its own traffic, or an email list. So we always are out there looking in our niche. Our niche is very narrow, so you don't see a lot of candidates through the years. There's several out there, but most of them don't play out during due diligence. But on occasion, something comes up that's sort of a perfect fit for our business. So that was always a real natural one, because we knew if we made an acquisition in our specific niche, we could use what we already knew about the niche, our current assets, and probably fairly quickly get an ROI on that investment. And those acquisitions typically looking to make my money back 6 months to a year at most, because I'm able to capitalize on what we already know and the assets that we already have. So that's kind of one way, and that's great for brand extension. It's also great for sometimes getting another brand that you can run independently in the same niche, which can be great because a lot of customers will buy multiple products from different brands. And it's also a way of sort of maximizing the assets that you currently have. Along the way as well, diversification comes up. If you're in an online business and you're in one niche, maybe in one type of marketplace, it's probably not a great idea because things change. Having done this for 2 decades, I can tell you we've had to reinvent the NetPix business probably half a dozen times to stay relevant. So we definitely identified along the way that it's probably important that we diversify a little bit and go way outside of the niche and also into different business models. So that's kind of what's opened us up to things like FBA, Shopify, e-commerce, content sites, and things that are not even necessarily in the niche. And some of that sometimes is just burnout, to be honest. You do something for 24 years, you go through phases of burnout, and sometimes I just need something new and some new challenge. And it's pretty exciting to acquire a site that's up and running in a brand new niche, a new vertical, and a new marketplace, and have to learn that. And sometimes you can pull that knowledge into your existing business, and other times you can't. It just kind of runs independently, but it's also a great way to kind of keep yourself fresh. So I've always kind of been doing that. And I think, several years ago, I had been bought and sold several sites from some of the other brokers that are out there. Along came Empire Flippers, really just kind of loved the way the marketplace works, the once a week where you release the new businesses, the way you do your due diligence, the way that everything is sort of structured the same. So I found it quite easy to look at 10 different opportunities and be able to do a quick comparison to know if this was something that would fit potentially that I should pursue further or not. So that's kind of really where I got started with Empire Flippers. And most of my recent acquisitions have been through your marketplace.
Yeah, it's really great to see that, we've seen you on our marketplace now for all of these years and the progression you've shown as well through the years acquiring. Now, you've also acquired an e-commerce business from us, a FBA business, and the content site, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's really great to see. And currently, are they all doing well even through these hard times that we've been currently facing with the pandemic and things of this nature?
Yeah, all of them have played out well. Like anything, when you acquire something, there's always a learning curve. Things always take a little bit longer, maybe than expected. I've been on the seller side as well. The famous question is like, how much time does it take per week to run the business? Well, when you're the seller, you're optimized. So you may say 5 hours. The reality as a buyer, you should double or triple that initially because it's never going to take just that in the beginning. And then the same exact was the case for each one that I've acquired as well. But I always build that in to my mindset. And I think it's important for a new buyer to kind of understand that you're not going to be up and running and optimized on day one. You're going to have a learning curve, especially if this is new to you. But as long as you're willing to put in that work and effort up front and take a little bit of time with it, you will get to that optimization point later on. So we've been able to get to that point in each of the businesses that we're talking about. And even the ones that I've acquired in the past, we've bought and sold several of them. And most have done very well. It's hard to have 100% or 1,000% batting average on these. But even on those, sometimes it's really just a matter, it doesn't grow when you expect it to grow. And we haven't faced too much situations where the sales have just declined. There have been times we've had to reinvent things a little bit. So I think I probably have experienced virtually everything, but at least the ones from Empire Flippers, I always knew exactly what I was getting into. Really pleasant experience, really nice sellers in every case. And the transition and migration team at Empire Flippers has been excellent in each one.
Awesome. I find it so interesting that you've really kind of dipped your toe into so many different monetizations. Sometimes we get buyers that tend to go in really deep and say just content or just FBA. So I do find it fascinating that you've been able to create such a diverse portfolio. Being able to talk about your buying experience almost difficult in a way because we wish we could talk about everything. But I think for today's episode, we did want to talk about just one of the content business you bought from us because you did some really interesting things to grow that business in particular. So I was wondering if we could get into some of the particulars on that deal. So for those who don't know, this was the content site purchased in 2015 for $164K in the advertising niche. So start me off for that deal. What sort of drew you to that business and how did you know upon seeing it that would be a good business for you?
Sure. So in this case, it happened to be in a niche I had a lot of experience in, was very comfortable. So I knew that would take my risk way down because I knew if I could confirm the assets and what was there from the traffic to the website, to the email list and the email size, to the partnerships that this seller had, that I would be able to pretty easily incorporate that into my current operation, as well as make any adjustments along the way if something didn't pan out exactly the way that I was hoping. So, that is a luxury if you're acquiring a business and it's already in a niche that or like you mentioned, if it happens to be in a monetization style that you're very comfortable with, it's a big plus. And yeah, if you're a buyer and you have some of that skill set, it's probably the easiest kind of purchase to make. When you go into one where it's a brand new niche, and it's a brand new monetization style, absolutely, those are a little bit tougher because the learning curve is going to kick in. So for me, when I saw this come through, before I did the due diligence and verifications, I knew right away that this would be one that my risk was going to be fairly minimized. And I felt like if we just did things right on our side, I could see ROI in 6 months to 12 months, no problem.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, how long did it take you to find that business that felt like it ticked your boxes and, minimized your risk?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the niche that I'm in the financial publishing niche, it takes a while because it's not like FBA, where obviously there's several dozen FBA businesses to choose from. With this niche, that's not the case. With this niche, it's probably, I would say in a course of a year, I may look at a half a dozen, 6 to 8 possible acquisitions from very, very small to a little bit larger. And usually maybe 1 to 2, if that, may get to the point where it's worth going into due diligence and possibly doing the acquisition. So probably in this case, I had made several acquisitions from like 2010 to 2015, but it's usually about 1 to 2 a year at most.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, well, if you had a specific sub niche that you're looking at, obviously that's going to take some time to find that right one. So I was just curious. So for this deal in particular, how did you go about getting financing?
Yeah, in this case, we just used cash flow from our existing business. So it was just cash on hand. So didn't really use any third party or outside financing for the purchase.
Okay. And so when you got to the stage of due diligence, can you walk me through how you approached that for this deal and how you made sure that you were able to really tick off those boxes that you were looking for?
Yeah, a big part of the asset on this deal was the email list. The websites themselves had traffic, but it wasn't substantial traffic. Certainly they were worthwhile, but that was not going to be anywhere close to the purchase price that we were looking at. Like you had mentioned, it was a 6-figure deal. So the email list basically was generating virtually all of the revenue. And basically it was third-party offers as advertising to that list. So I knew that email list was it. So a lot of the verification and due diligence came down to this email list. Does it actually have deliverability? Does it have high engagement scores, open rates, click-through rates? Are there spam issues? Are there any compliance issues? Which ESP does the list live on? Is it on Aweber? Is it on GetResponse? Is it on an independent server? All of this matters because, as you know, you can be shut down overnight by one of these third-party ESPs. So I really had to understand the list itself, how the list was generated, making sure that these weren't names or contacts that were just purchased, because that's always a disaster, making sure that they were received and they came into the funnels in the proper way, and making sure that the people were actually engaged, that they were open the emails, they actually wanted to receive these emails, and then of course that they were clicking on the offers that were in there. And it's quite easy to find large lists and contacts out there that will be completely worthless. So for me, that was the biggest risk and the biggest challenge, was to go through that verification process.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm glad you brought all that up, that it's one thing to see the email list and go, right, well, is it going to hit these specifications? Are they real contacts? How engaged are they? So on and so forth. Later on, we'll get into, how that played out for you and what you're able to do with it. Before we do, I was just wondering, how did you approach negotiations on this business? Was it full cash offer, or did you have some other deal structure that you had?
Yeah, in this case, I did know that I was probably one of the few buyers that are out there for a site like this. So that definitely gave me an advantage. But at the same time, any purchase that I've ever done, I really need the seller to feel like they're winning as well. So while I felt like I did have a fair amount of leverage, I probably, in the end, paid a little bit more than I needed to, because I knew I was going to need to rely on the seller for the transition and for the 1 or 2 months afterwards. And that's exactly what happened, because he felt like he did well, and I was happy with the acquisition. We had a great relationship, after we closed. I continue to stay in contact to this day, still have occasional contact as well. So in my case, what I did is I just structured the deal where I offered a certain amount up front, and then I had a holdback. And the holdback was really for about, 30 to 45 days. And it was just to ensure that everything transitioned properly, that everything that was promised actually happened. That included some of the relationships with the other marketing companies that we were going to rely upon for revenue, making sure that things were okay with the transition on the email list. So that worked for me. And I've done that in almost every deal that I've done, where maybe, let's say 80 to 90% fine, it's up front. But then I always like to have some holdback to keep the seller motivated. Most of the time it's not a problem. Most sellers are great, but they're busy. They've moved on once they've sold. It's nice for them to still have like this little bit holding, a little bit kind of holding out for them. keeps them engaged and making sure that everything's going smoothly because it's enough capital that they're definitely going to want to get that 10 or 20% in the next 30 to 60 days. So that's the way that I structured this deal, and it would be something I would probably recommend, especially on a little higher dollar. If it's a lower dollar, maybe not as important. If it's something where you can verify everything 100%, like an FBA business, different story. But when it's something like this that you have a few things you need to be careful about, it's probably a good idea to have a little bit of a holdback.
Yeah, it's important to definitely take any larger acquisitions with some approach to being safety first in your investment, especially when you said compared to like an e-commerce business. With content sites, it's a little bit different. You're a little bit more at the goodwill of, I guess, the actual platforms that you're running these things on versus a physical product, I guess you could say. But so you explained a little bit about the negotiations and kind of how the deal took place and you fully acquired the business. Now, Mark, can you walk us through what are some of the initial changes that you did take to kind of reach that overall plan you had with this acquisition?
Sure. I mean, for me, like I had mentioned, a big part of the asset was the email list. So I needed to make sure that the list remained engaged and that they remained opening the emails and clicking the emails because that was 100% the revenue was coming from that. So that was really essential. I needed to make sure that the list was being cleaned on a regular basis. And a lot of people, what they do is they get so hung up on the vanity metrics where I have a list of 65,000, 75, 90,000, 100,000, but then the open rate is 8%. And the click-through rate is a fraction. I'm always like a believer, forget the vanity metrics. It doesn't matter how big your list is. If you're speaking of an email-oriented business, what is the open rates? What are the click-through rates? I would much rather dump people that are not opening the emails in the last, 45 days than keeping them on the list for some reason, brag to myself or somebody else that I have this big, massive list. One, it really kills your deliverability when you do not have very high engagement. You can end up for sure in a bad place at Google, which, as you know, probably half the emails now are Gmail. And if they put you into a medium or low reputation on your domain, I mean, pretty much you might as well just close up shop because that's it when it comes to that asset itself. So for me, that was really essential to make sure that things were not just advertisements, which that's what it was initially. It was just offer after offer after offer. People in this niche, the finance niche, yes, they're always looking for opportunities. So that's a good thing. There is a curiosity, but you also tend to burn through people quickly if that's what you do. So one of the first things I needed to do was to provide these people with just more content, with more just quality free giveaway type of assets, things that are almost painful sometimes to give away. That's what I always tell people when you're doing a giveaway. It can't be a throwaway. It's got to be something that almost hurts to give it away that you probably easily should and could charge for. That's going to be the type of thing that's going to start to build a little bit of loyalty from that list. So that's one of the first things that we did. So besides the email list hygiene, besides making sure we only focused on, engaged people, making sure that everything was great on the deliverability, we made sure that we started to interlace some just content. So it wasn't constantly just asking. We had to start to give a little bit in the relationship. And what we found is people stayed on and stayed active much longer by doing this. Has always been my experience. People always go away and people worry a little bit about unsubscribes and all that. I never worry about that because there's always new people to come onto the list, but you want to have that relationship extend out longer. You don't want them to burn out after a week or two on your list. They're just tired of hearing from you. It's just very difficult to monetize any model, especially an email model, when you're paying for leads if they're going to be burnt out on you in a week or two. So that's definitely some of the things that I did initially. Another thing that we did was we already had products in this niche. So for us, it was a luxury, but we were able to slowly start to introduce our products to this list. So rather than just selling third-party advertising, which in the finance niche does pay fairly well, it's never going to pay as well as having your own products. So rather than being an affiliate or rather than being paid, for performance, by leads or by clicks, actually being able to offer and market our existing products to these lists made a big difference. We were very quickly able to monetize some products that we had directly to these leads and to this contact. Again, you're not always going to have that sort of situation coming in, but that's also about being a smart buyer and finding these kind of situations that may fit perfectly with something you already have, especially if you become somebody who buys a second site or a third site. That's when you can start to leverage and compound and sort of build your little mini empire. And that's kind of what we have found while we've continued to do this. And probably the last thing that I did as an insurance policy is knowing when you play in these sandboxes, it's somebody else's sandbox. And it could be, like I mentioned, like an ActiveCampaign or an Aweber or GetResponse. They can have a bad day and shut you down tomorrow. You better have a backup. If you're just FBA and you don't have any backup, Amazon can shut you down tomorrow. If you're just doing, a Shopify store and you only have one channel that you're going after, same thing. It's usually the worst idea. If any one Google content sites, if you're just relying on Google Organic and that's it, big mistake. So we made sure that we had backup ESPs, meaning we could move the list and we actually had the list on another email service provider just in case anything happened. That insurance policy is essential because over the years I've had all these things happen with every single channel I've mentioned. And if you're not prepared for it, you can overnight be done. And that's why I said it's really essential making sure that you have your backups in place before you need them. Most people wait until they get shut down and then they start to panic and try to figure out what to do. We've tried to always sort of anticipate that's a possibility and make adjustments and set things up ahead of time.
Excellent advice. I'm wondering, you said we a few times. Who was we? Were you doing this all with a team, mostly on your own, or what was this sort of layout?
Yeah, it's been a combination. In my finance business, I have a business partner and we also have a small team. So anything in that space with that team. When I've done e-commerce, I have a different business partner who doesn't have any interest in the finance niche at all, but is very interested in e-commerce. And when I've done FBA, I had another business partner. I've almost done everything with business partners and partnerships. It's always worked great for me. I know there's a lot of horror stories out there with people, but for me, that's always been the best way to do it because I don't have every skill set. I have certain skill sets that I'm really good at. And so I usually partner with somebody else who has a different skill set than I have, or they have a lot more patience for certain things like operations that I don't have. I'll bring the business development and the marketing. Somebody else may bring the tech or the operational skills that I just, maybe if I put my time towards could be okay, but it would just be a waste of my time and effort, spending it there. So I've always almost done these on a partnership basis. It works for me.
No, it's a good point. Earlier you were saying that you had to strike this balance. It's the balance of really when you have a lot riding on your email list, being able to nurture that audience, but then just not, obviously not reaching out to them too much. I think obviously a lot of entrepreneurs face that same difficulty. And I'm wondering, is there a secret sauce to finding that balance? Because I would say even I experienced that, when we look at our email list, and it's like, right, where is that line? And I'm curious if there's something to you that resonates and feels like it really works.
Yeah, and I think you definitely don't want to be afraid to contact the list on a regular basis. You can even actually do things daily. It's really not going to hurt the business as long as I try to sort of stick to something which is like give 3, take 1. I feel like that's kind of my ratio. Like if I feel like 75% of what I'm putting out there is value, and then I'm asking for something 1/4 of the time in return, that seems to work really, really well. Clearly, the content I'm putting out plays into the products that we offer. We're not putting out, information that is just completely unrelated. So yeah, there is always an angle, of course. We'll be talking specifically about areas, if it's in the finance niche, that we happen to have products on. It just makes sense. You're not fooling anybody, right? They all know that you're going to try to sell them something at some point. That's not a surprise. But at the same time, if I feel like, somebody could be reading these emails or going to my website and literally never pay me a nickel and they can get tons of value out of it, then I know we're doing things right. If it's not the case, if I'm like, with my emails and my site or a combination of the two, there's really not much there unless they buy something, it's probably a bad idea. Look, that used to work. It worked great. 20 years ago when I started, you didn't have to have content. You didn't have to have a relationship. There was not any kind of funnel building. You didn't have to have giveaways. It was just a different world. But today you're kind of competing with so many different voices, so many different emails, so many different models that are out there. It's a challenge. And in order for them to even be at all interested in you, you do have to build relationship a little bit. You do have to kind of put out some value. It's really, really essential that you do that. If you don't, it's almost impossible just to kind of go out there and just aggressively market and build any kind of business. You may be able to do it very short term. You may have a quick hit, but it's never sustainable. So a sustainable business is really built upon those relationships over time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that, Mark. And you mentioned like a different approach. So you're saying, moving forward into what you would call like maybe like most popular trends for email marketing right now, would you say is taking more of that story approach, not selling them at the beginning on your product or service and nurturing them more so? Is that what you're saying basically?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think email in general needs to have more personality. And look, that's even something we struggle with because it never was required before. You could be fairly corporate and just honest and upfront, and that's all it took. It doesn't work as well anymore. Sort of that corporate approach. Like if you look at YouTube, right, YouTube channels, the more personal and the more homespun they are, the better they do. If you try to be very corporate, 5 years ago, that worked great. Now, if you're very corporate, it doesn't work well at all. So we've even had to adapt, and we're still working on it to try to bring more of our personalities into it. Like we've done so many webinars over time. We would never get on the camera. It was just like, why? Nobody needs to see us. They're here to buy the product, to learn about the product. That was true years ago, but not anymore. Now people want to know you. They want to see you. They want to hear from you. They want to learn a little bit about you. They want to get to know you. So those things I think are essential. Now, I don't think you need to wait necessarily to put out there what you offer, because hopefully what you offer is such value that you're doing them a disservice if you make them wait. But I think it does need to be a combination. Like when we bring in a new lead to our email list, we probably, over 50% of the revenue that we're ever going to make from that lead actually happens in the first 7 to 10 days. So if I waited, if I was too shy or too bashful or too afraid to let them know that we have something that they may be interested in, I would probably be losing a lot of revenue, because the reality on engagement on emails is it goes way down after that first week, no matter what you do. So if I wait too long, that's a mistake. But I just think you can't just hard sell from the start. That's why we give them really high value up front, something that's free that they can take and run with on their own, and they don't have to buy anything from us. That happens right away in the relationship. And then we start to mix the two.
Got it. Okay. Now, during our ROI study that had last spoken on the phone about, you had mentioned something about having an issue with getting quality opt-ins from your email list on the landing page. Now, can you explain to us how you've gone about fixing this issue, or maybe how you've figured out how to get higher quality leads when it comes to the email list opt-ins on the page?
Yeah, I mean, some of it comes down to this. Like we can go ahead and advertise to multiple sources in order to do our lead generation. And I can run numbers on one source, and each email may literally bring in just, let's say, $1 ever. That's the lifetime value. I can bring in another email, right? It's just an email. It's just the same size as a somebody@gmail. That email might bring in $25 per email over time, right? It's a 25x difference. So what makes up the difference between the $1 person versus the $25 person? Now, part of it comes down to how much you paid, of course, for that lead. If I'm paying $2 for a lead and I get $4 lifetime, that's okay, right? That's a good ROI. But if I pay $25 and I'm getting $10, even though 10 normally is above average, again, that's a problem. So it's a little complex because some of it depends upon what is the cost going in, but there is a huge range and a huge difference. So things, of course, that we've learned over time is one, just the simplest thing of tracking where your leads are coming from each source. It's a pain. It's a pain to set up, but once you set it up, it's invaluable, because I'll know from the first 200, 300 leads coming in from any source, whether it's a winner or we just need to kill it. Because if it's not going to work with the first 200 or 300, it's never going to work. Despite the person selling you that, you just need to keep doing it and over time it'll happen, never does. If it doesn't work in the first 200 to 300, it's never going to actually play out. The next thing is we had to kind of work on our funnels. So when an email comes in, like I mentioned, we needed to start to offer something a little bit quicker in the process, because I didn't even realize how quickly the disengagement was happening. So I was doing that approach where I was, let me take more time. I don't want to be too aggressive. I was a little afraid to be aggressive, and realized, no, you know what? We need to at least let them know we have something, or they're going to go find it somewhere else, in that week or in that moment. So that was really important to know, that we could actually start to have conversion right away and know what those metrics are. So again, I know if I don't have 1% to 2% of those people buying in that first something in the first 7 to 14 days, again, I know I have a funnel that works. If that lead source is not converting, it's never going to convert. So those metrics are essential. You do have to, have a little bit of experience to build those, but by having those in place, it's made a big difference. And then probably the last part is just the giveaway itself. What I've found sometimes is, what market are we going after? Sometimes we've gone after maybe the wrong type of market. If you're talking like the finance niche, the wrong type of person, maybe it's somebody who's probably never going to spend any money on products or any money on their education in this niche. Maybe it's the giveaway is on a certain focus where there's so much free information for them to think about actually buying something from you, it'll never happen. So a little bit of it was realizing that the giveaway can actually determine whether or not somebody's ultimately going to become a customer, and making it very clear up front that the giveaway is, this specific type of investing strategy and this specific model, and maybe even requires this type of capital. Then those leads that start to come in are the sort of people that you want to attract, rather than maybe the easier route was just making something where it's very general, but you end up having people that aren't converting. So those are the various ways that we've improved the model, but we continue to have to focus on that every single day.
I'm loving this. It's like I'm trying to take notes and it's like, gosh, like I can't even keep up with all the nuggets of wisdom here. So this is fantastic. I don't want to make you repeat too much because you've already offered quite a bit, but I do want to ask this just in case. Would you say, there's a key aspect that other website owners maybe miss or get wrong when trying to improve their email campaigns, no matter the niche or industry? Again, I do think some of the things you said would help, but I do want to open the floor just in case you have anything specific there.
Yeah, I think the several things that I talked about are probably the biggest mistakes that I would see. One is afraid to email. They're afraid to email too often. Honestly, I think if you're afraid to email too often, there's something wrong with your email. You need to keep people engaged. You need to keep people looking forward to hearing from you. If they're not, that means then there maybe is something wrong with the email itself. So I think keeping it engaging, keeping it entertaining to a degree for sure, putting some personality into that is essential. If you don't have that, I can only write a certain way. So I found sometimes I've had to bring in somebody to write emails, even sometimes temporary, just to give a different tone and a different voice. And then they'll write something a certain way. And I'm like, wow, I never would have thought to write it that way. And I think that's really important to do. Well, what I would probably stay away from is a lot of people do these like templates or email swipes, or they do things where you fill in certain words and it kicks out an email. That might be okay from a strictly transactional type of email when you're just hardcore going for a sale and you want something to give you a structure that would make sense. That could be a nice shortcut. But if you're talking about developing a relationship with the list, it's going to be really difficult to use any kind of templates or email swipes. You can get some good inspiration. I get a good inspiration for email subjects from other people. Yeah, absolutely. That's really good to do. But ultimately, it kind of has to come from you. And you need to try to attract people that sort of fit your personality and your style. If you can't, then you need to find somebody else that you can outsource it to or work with on a contractual basis that can have that kind of personality to bring in the sort of people that you're after. So those, I think, are some of the biggest mistakes I think that people make, with emails, and then just really protecting the list, just realizing that it's not a game of how many emails you have on your list. Somebody with 1,000 emails can blow away somebody with 50,000 emails. If those are 1,000 people that really want to hear from that person, that is way more valuable than 50 times that size where they're like, oh, God, another email from this person, unsubscribe.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the personality, sort of that personality advice again, because I definitely see that. Like as soon as you were talking about that, I was going, gosh, some of the emails that I know we've worked on within our own team, like having to sit down and when you really are thinking about trying to craft something that is going to be engaging or captures your voice or personality, those are the hardest things to do. And then, like you said, it's like sometimes if you get that another person in the room, all of a sudden you're blown away by their take on it and their voice on it. And so I find that super fascinating because I'm sure a lot of people are, they're thinking emails about the numbers and they're not realizing that 1,000 that's engaged is better than the 50,000 that could be tempted into unsubscribing and just have no clue what the secret sauce is. And it does sound like really getting those pieces all put together. Like you said, personality, among other things, just matters. Now, of course, I know that there's the internet a little bit hard to predict and hard to figure out how to really future-proof your business. I know you said even in your own businesses, you've iterated so many times, you've reinvented so many times. But I'm wondering, do you have a take on how to best future-proof your content sites? Whether that's from like an SEO perspective, email perspective, anything like that?
Yeah, I think some of it is really just being up to date on the trends and knowing your metrics and what's working. And what we always look to is if we start to see our conversion rates go down or we start to see our revenues start to go down, if it becomes more difficult when we do a product launch to make those conversions easily, that's kind of usually the early sign that we need to start to do some things a little bit different, that there's been a shift in the marketplace. And sometimes, like I kind of thought of one other thing with the email list in general, and this is something we've also struggled with, is you sometimes have to really take an opinion on something and not be afraid to offend some people. And I don't mean in a bad way to be offensive, but I mean to sort of take a stand on certain approaches. And we've had to do that in our investing and finance niche a little bit. There are various styles of investing. There are some right now when we're talking that have gotten very hot and they're very temporary. They're very fad driven. So we sometimes have to take the opposite stance and not be afraid of that. And sometimes we've been trying to be in the past so neutral that nothing comes across right, in the emails. So you have to sort of believe in something and stand for something. And I was kind of like thought of that as you were chatting, that I was like, that's something that I need to put out there because I think it's really important, in the personality that you also kind of take. Make sure people understand, okay, this is who you are and this is what you stand for. Then you're going to attract those kind of people. So for us, that's really what we try to do. We sort of look at our metrics and we start to realize this may be a time that we need to start reinventing a little bit what we do. Is it always easy? It's not always easy, but I've kind of found it's always very doable. And sometimes it happens when I'm like, I honestly do not know what to do next. I'm not sure what the answer is. And that can be really nerve-wracking, especially when you've been doing something for a couple decades and you literally cannot think of what the solution is. And what I've just found is just continue to experiment, continue to take some chances, look at some other people that are out there and try some things and just not get stuck in doing things the same way. Anytime I've started to try a few things and experimented, all of a sudden something will click. And I guess maybe it's easy to say, but just having some additional ideas and inspiration, lean on your team if you have one. It's a great, thing to do. Don't get caught up just in your head and your ideas. Other people will have sometimes much better ideas. And then I'm always out there looking for more information. And that may be, listening to other podcasts, listening to podcasts like this. You just can sit there and absorb and you just get ideas. It may be going to, when we could, back in the day, we could go to conferences and internet conferences and marketing conferences. I can sit in those and just get ideas start happening. Even when they're talking about something and I might not even been doing what they're teaching specifically, it just clicks. Something else clicks. I'm like, wait a minute, I have this great idea. So just putting yourselves in those environments, I think, is another great way to sort of reinvent when you need to. So a lot of it is tactical, but some of it is really thinking, I think, a little bit bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I reminisce about the days always when we used to be able to go to these conferences and meet people face to face that have the same, inspiration through working online and digital space and being able to bounce ideas off of one another. And yeah, it's really sad that we can't have that now. At the same time, always learning, always looking for new information, new ways to optimize your business is really something that can benefit you in the long-term range as well too. And now on the subject of, being in this space for so long, so many years now, what are you seeing as maybe some of the best growth opportunities for potential buyers that are looking to buy their first content space site? As far as the content site itself, are you seeing there's more opportunity within the email list? Is there other opportunities that maybe buyers are just not realizing that they should be?
Yeah, it's always interesting because sometimes you think that you have to use very advanced tactics to be successful and that you need to have this like super high level of expertise or knowledge. The reality is most content websites never even have the pixel installed for Facebook or Google to do simple retargeting. It's the lowest hanging fruit out there, yet people don't do it. Or they wait until they've grown the site to a certain point and then they're like, guess I should have put that on there. So it seems really basic, but it's shocking how often that is just not there. And it's such a waste, it's such a shame because you've lost all of that traffic that's come in before that you have the ability to retarget. And I will tell you, retargeting to your website visitors or retargeting to your email list, which you can upload to Facebook or to Google, or retargeting to YouTube channel watchers is so much higher of an ROI for the cost than trying to do cold traffic generation. There's just no comparison. You probably need it all, but man, if you want to average down your advertising budget, that is the best way to do it. And that also is the email list. Again, so many content sites, they never try to collect an email. They're afraid to have a pop-up. Look, I'm not saying you should drive somebody crazy who's on your website, but if they come and go and they never come back, why not make an effort to try to grab them one time, maybe two times, and try to get their email? Give them something of incredible value to give you that email, and make sure that you have like an autoresponder series or an onboarding
follow up
engagement
with them
series.
Once you get that contact.
Yeah.
Don't
Follow
just let
up
it go
with
to
them.
waste, right?
Right. So they're not shocked when they get an email from you 90 days later where you try to sell something to them.
Right.
But it's such easy, low-hanging fruit that most people just simply do not do. Yes, you could try to figure out the Google algorithm. Yeah, you could definitely do that, and you should do that, and you got to keep loading on new content. Everybody kind of knows that. Unfortunately, those rules can change overnight. What isn't going to change overnight is your email list. You're always going to have it. You can move it to another ESP. Even a pixel has some risk because Facebook could shut you down. They could say you're no longer allowed to advertise. And that pixel then is not as valuable as it was. Hopefully you have the other one, the YouTube and the Google one. But your email list, that's always yours. Make sure you download it and make sure you back it up on occasion just in case. But that's an amazing asset that you can very easily move with you no matter what somebody else decides on another platform. So that would be my suggestion. It's kind of the easy stuff, but it's just always ignored.
The most valuable. Oh, yeah, definitely.
100%. I guess kind of in the same vein of learning and lessons and just being able to sort of get better, as we were talking about before, what would you say are top tools or resources that could help aspiring entrepreneurs with their businesses?
That's a good question, actually. Certainly, I would say knowing to outsource when the time is right. These days, it's amazing between what you can get on Upwork or even Fiverr. I would say that's really important. Too often, even in my experience, I've tried to do everything myself. And then I realized, if I actually brought in this person who knows exactly what they're doing, the quality of the work is so much better than anything I could have ever generated, and the length of time that it takes is so minimized. So I would say I would not be afraid to bring in somebody else. You don't need a business partner like I'm doing, but absolutely kind of rely on other people that are experts in specific areas. And it's very easy now to find that with reviews and these marketplaces that are out there. So I lean on that certainly quite a bit. I would say the internet conferences, that yes, they may be a little virtual now, but whether it's, ClickFunnels or, Entreport or any of those conferences that are out there, I have just gotten some of the best ideas ever at those conferences. So whether you attend them virtual or you can go one of these days, I think that it's very hard to kind of replicate what you will get from those experiences. Just hearing other people that have already done it, that are experts, you can't beat it. And honestly, one of the best things that I've ever done, and this is not meant to be an advertisement for Empire Flippers, but is to actually acquire sites at Empire Flippers, because I have learned verticals and niches that I never would have been able to do from the start. Like starting an FBA business from the beginning, I tried, it didn't work. Acquiring an FBA business, now I was actually able to learn that niche. Trying to start a Shopify store from the beginning, it's doable, but it's one heck of a long process and it's probably going to fail. Acquiring one that's up and running and operational, you can now actually learn the entire model. So you don't have to go for the most expensive business on the marketplace. You can go for one that's inexpensive, that's only bringing in minimal profit, but it's amazing. You'll probably learn 80-90% of what you need to make that model successful. And then the next time maybe you decide to do it on your own, you're going to be so much better off. I just think it's such a jumpstart to be able to have something that's already operational and be able to observe something that's already been set up than trying to do it yourself from the beginning. I think that's very difficult. Having something that's already up and running and profitable to some degree, it's a great jumpstart.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on that, because it's obviously something that we feel like we know to be true, within the company, but it does take sort of doing something like this where we have buyers come on and they're able to share their stories and confirm and sort of add to exactly what you're saying is like, it's one thing to start versus to buy, and you can actually learn on site basically when you're buying and still be profitable and still grow things. Clearly you're a testament to that, because you've been able to sort of jump all over, get into so many different monetizations, add, your content business to other businesses. You've really been able to mold things in a way that, like you were saying, it might not have been nearly as possible had you not just jumped in and bought. So it's very cool. On that note, you've obviously been in this game for a long time and you have a lot of experience. We do like to ask people and wrap things up with, what would you say has been your funniest moment working as a digital entrepreneur? Sometimes it's a difficult question because, hard to narrow things down. But yeah, just wondering if you have any takes on that.
Funniest moment as a digital entrepreneur. Boy, that's the tough one.
Yeah, we save the tough one for last.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes situations become funny eventually. And what I mean by that is there are certain days where virtually everything goes wrong. It's almost comical. And, you actually have to stand back and just laugh at what happened, because that's really the only reaction that's probably going to get you anywhere. And so for me, that's probably the one thing that I can think of. There's a lot of situations with customers and with people and things that, I've more than rolled my eyes that have just been kind of shocking and entertaining on that side of it. But sometimes it's just the things that you get thrown at you. You have to kind of take it somewhat lighthearted, because you're going to be in store for some surprises. There's going to be an email that's going to pop in your inbox that is unwelcome at times, and being able to have the proper perspective and ultimately look back on it and maybe laugh about it is probably going to be pretty important.
Yeah, I think you need that ability to take a step back, be a little bit lighthearted. It doesn't have to be life or death. Your business is important, but you should be enjoying it at the end of the day. Always bring you down when it's difficult. So yeah, no, I think that's actually great advice. So we've pretty much run through our questions here. You've been awesome. You've certainly learned a lot through this interview and really enjoyed having you on. Is there anything else that we might have missed in this sort of process that you'd like to share, or we good to go?
No, I think we've covered everything. I guess, my one parting message would be, yeah, I've been doing this a long time and I have a decent knowledge base. But to this day, I am still seeking out new knowledge. I am still learning. I'm still buying, other courses and other people's knowledge. I'm still outsourcing because there's just no way to know everything. But don't worry about that. You don't need to be an expert in everything. Try to be an expert in a few things. And then the knowledge is out there that you can, emulate. And that's what I would do. That's what I continue to do. And I think that's essential.
Yeah, I'm glad you added that because I think people listening to this, it's so easy to look up to you and go, well, gosh, this person's been in the space for a long time. They have all this experience, but you're still learning. And it is that age-old advice of, just get started and get your hands dirty, learning or buying and, make it happen. So excellent to see that you've made that happen and that you've got such an amazing portfolio. I think that people are going to be really excited to hear about what you've done.
Great. Well, thanks. I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Mark. Really appreciate having you on the call. Hey everyone, as promised, now that we've wrapped up the episode and learned about how you can optimize your email list to gain better conversions from your audience, we wanted to connect you with some of the best listings in the content space on the Empire Flippers marketplace. So first we have listing 50140, which is an affiliate and Amazon Associates business in the health and fitness and food and beverages niche. So what I really enjoy about this particular listing is that it already has a few of the outreach marketing funnels that you would probably want to have already established within a business when you acquire something. So with an email list that we had discussed during this episode, this particular business already has 9,150 subscribers stored in MailChimp and really offers a great potential for a potential buyer to come in and optimize the business further because they could come in and utilize some of the email marketing techniques that we discussed during this episode. And also what's included with the business are push notification subscribers. So there's over 6,300 subscribers and 15 touch and multi-week drip campaigns already built. So a great foundation already established with the email list and the notifications. Push notifications are already set up for you. So as a buyer, you could come in and maybe focus on other avenues or maybe focus on optimizing the email campaigns further to get even better conversions for this business as well. Also, another interesting factor about this business is that it has a Pinterest account, including an audience with 24,000 monthly viewers and 1,700 followers currently active within the account. So there's a lot of traffic that are coming to this particular Pinterest account that shows a lot of great growth opportunities as well, having that large of a brand awareness and even, an audience that are currently looking at, what's going on for this business on Pinterest as well too. So this is something that I notice is really a great foundation, a great opportunity for someone that might already have some experience with building an email list and utilize some of those techniques that we discussed in this week's episode.
Yeah, that's awesome, Brandon. I enjoy seeing a business that is doing well on Pinterest. I think that's such a cool platform. And I know your business in particular, being in the health and fitness and food and beverage niches, they're pretty well positioned to get a lot of followers and stuff on Pinterest. So it's great they've already got that foundation built. Mine does not have Pinterest, so that's okay. It's still a really cool business. Listing 48446. It's an affiliate and display advertising business in the news and education niche. So just some top things I really liked about this business in particular. Only natural link building techniques have been performed on this asset. I think that's great. That means, there's no PBNs that have been used in the past. This seller has gained natural links through a 3-step strategy. Their first step is Haro, or I don't know if it's Haro or Haro, how people say it, but help a reporter out pitching. So this is done every day by one of their VAs. And the next is creating link bait articles, such as content related to statistics. And just all this is like a strong content strategy for building those natural white hat links. And that's great. So that's something that a buyer could take it and, run with the same strategy or go ahead and just implement some other strategies on their own. In terms of how the business's revenue is split up, I think it's got a healthy split, generating revenue from affiliate 85% and display advertising 15%. So I'd say there's room to grow that advertising a bit more, but I like that it's still got a nice, healthy chunk there where it's still making a bit of money and, considering it's affiliate, not something like Amazon Associates, like you're going to have probably a little bit more of a trustworthy source of income. I know Amazon's always changing their stuff all the time, but that's why affiliate seems to be a little bit of a stronger option nowadays. So it's just got a really nice split in that regard. And then finally, there's no email list with this business. So that means it's a really nice growth opportunity if the buyer wanted to take that on, considering we've spent so much of the episode talking about the power of the list and how to either start one or take one on. I just think that this business sort of relates to everything we learned about today. So hopefully someone gets excited and might want to take this and run with it and figure out how to incorporate an email list into the overall strategy. And that pretty much wraps up this episode. So thanks so much for everyone for tuning in. We hope you've gained some valuable insight to the opportunities digital acquisitions offer. Make sure to click the link in the description or visit empireflippers.com/marketplace to learn more about these businesses or other listings currently live on our platform. And if you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave a comment and subscribe to this channel for more great content that'll be released every week. So until next time, we're your host. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brandon, and thank you so much for tuning into the Opportunity Podcast.